Krystal Ball was just on with Bill Maher, and this clip. I'm just gonna play the clip and then talk about my takeaway from it. Uh, my first thought is, it, I don't know why had to be this. I got you. This moment, everybody was like, "Oh, Krystal Ball, she got him. She schooled the f out of Bill Maher. She got him. She got him." Like everything doesn't have to be about you got somebody. Just talk. Like this didn't have to be a debate. I think it could have been it's an educational moment for Bill Maher because he has blind spots. But why is it this? Oh, you got him. You got him. There's no got you here. We're all getting got. And Krystal didn't do as well as everyone's making it out to be. But let's listen to this.
The economy. There's way too much government spending, and that's why we have inflation. So that's a large part of that.
Okay, so that's a fact. Like there's just he starts off saying we have so much government spending, that's why we have inflation. So Krystal Ball's going to jump in. If you don't know Krystal, she's great. I'm going to later on talk about Tim Pool where I disagree with him. If you follow the channel, you know I'm a huge Tim Pool fan. Listen to them all every day. Listen to Tim Pool and Nick Fuentes every day, pretty much, and Eric July. And so Krystal's great breaking point with breaking points. Formerly, they were with The Hill. So she falls under the populist left category. And for some reason, it's always like with them, to me, it seems like I have to play this character. I have to play this role. I have to defend this thing. And what she wants to defend are the $1,400 payments or whatever, payments that went to the people. And this isn't the moment for that. This is not the right moment for that. Everybody's like, she owned them, she owned them, she owned them. But she's off topic. And see, that's why she went to these payments. She's going to talk about it in a second. And I like the populist left, but y'all are just, man, it's really frustrating. So he's saying the payment. So he's saying government spending caused this.
The economy. There's way too much government spending, and that's why we have inflation. So that's.
And Krystal Ball is going to have a great point here, but let's listen to what she says.
It's a large part of that.
It's
just basic economics.
And that is not basic economics. We have this thing called a pandemic.
That's not basic. See, that's where I was like, wait, hold up. Before you start saying she owns somebody, that's not basic economics. What?
The economy. There's way too much government spending, and that's why we have inflation. So that's a large part of that. It's just basic economics.
And that is not basic economics. We have this thing called a pandemic.
What the heck? That's not basic economics. We had this thing called a pandemic. So what, Krystal? What's that? What's your point? We had this thing called a pandemic. So what? Was the pandemic a disease that made us burn money? Was the pandemic the disease that made us go and just print money digitally, basically? What does the pandemic have to do with that? And of course, she brings up the pandemic and she never addresses lockdowns as a bad decision because the lockdowns are the reason we had to pay, use the money to pay back to people. Because if you're going to lock people up, they can't work. Now what? So maybe you might have had to do some type of stimulus potentially even without lockdowns, but it definitely wouldn't have been nearly as much. So she's already getting off to a terrible start. She's going to get better. But this part, people were just like, yeah, Krystal. I'm like, nah, she's off topic here.
For that.
It's just basic economics. And that is not basic economics. We had this thing called a pandemic. We had a supply chain crisis. And by the way, there's a war in Ukraine.
It's played a role.
So to act like the only reason we have problems now is because people got a little bit of money in their bank account is just not honest.
And a little bit of money, they got more than we spent in World War II. So don't act like
hold on. Hold on.
So see, when you start saying that, a populist left is going to get like, I've got to defend the money to the people. That's not the topic, really.
Don't act like, you said don't act. Don't act like we had to react to the pandemic exactly the way we
That was Bill had her again. Bill had her right there. It's not, and it doesn't have to be a got you. People turn it into that, but Bill's right there. It's like that's what he's bringing up. He's like, well, the way we reacted to it, we didn't have to react that way. Why are you saying, oh, there's this thing called a pandemic? What does that have to do with anything? We know now we shouldn't have done it. A lot of the government things we did.
We did. We hacked it. We had to spend $6
Okay,
trillion
but how about
on
the
the forever flu.
trillions that the Federal Reserve shot at Wall Street?
So good. But see now, so they're jumping around. Now they're talking about government spending. Then she's talking about payments to the people. Then Bill's saying, well, we didn't need to do, just because the pandemic came doesn't mean we did the right things in response to it. And then now she's bringing up the Federal Reserve. Do you see, we're all over the place. I would consider the Federal Reserve under the government spending, even though that they try to make them seem like they're a public entity, but they're really a private bank. So you're really on like 4 different topics.
For some reason, people don't get upset about that.
How much? What'd you say?
So she's only bringing up the Federal Reserve from the standpoint of nobody's upset with that. So why are you upset to payments to the people? Well, why don't we just talk about the Federal Reserve and stop conflating this stuff? Let's just talk about the Federal Reserve, period. That would have been, so if you would have taken all this and said, hey, I hear you on that, the government spending, I think we should have made payments to the people, but lockdowns were bad. But let's stop for a second. Let's talk about the Federal Reserve. We don't hear about that much on national television. Remember when they did this? That would have been so much better than, I owned you. That wasn't, there was no need for that.
Trillions of dollars the Federal Reserve shot at Wall Street to stop the stock market and the bond market. No one gets upset about that, even though that was a massive
I don't know
factor
what
in
you're
inflation.
talking about. What do you mean shot at Wall Street?
Well,
when are we talking about?
I think the verbiage, the way she said it, he didn't understand.
That we're talking about buying assets, buying stocks, buying bonds, buying treasury bills so that they expand the balance sheet. This is during the crisis, the coronavirus.
I know. So I'm with Krystal on this one. She's like, wait, Brad, where you been? Yeah, imagine being so well off. You're like, wait, what? You're like, what crash? Like when the market crashed in like March of 2020, Bill, where were you? Were you like in a different country, or, when they had to shut your show down and you were at your compound and you did your show outside your house and you had the fake studio, the fake laughter, and it was awkward. You remember that part? Maybe you saw your investments go down a little bit. Bill, do you not remember that moment?
Virus crisis. When the stock market crashed, that is what the Fed did. They went into action. They shot
But the stock market didn't crash during COVID.
Now it's crashing.
I don't know what he's talking. I can't help you out on that one, Bill. But it still doesn't need to be a gotcha moment. I've got many blind spots in my life, so just help educate me.
It's crashing now.
It crashed, and the Fed came in and backstopped it. That's what happened.
Well, they're not bailing them out right now yet, though, so I don't know why he's chiming in with that. That's completely irrelevant. So I listened to Whitney Webb to talk about what they really should have been talking about. Krystal, at that moment, Krystal did a good job. She's talking about the Federal Reserve. You don't hear people talk about the Federal Reserve much. And I was listening to Whitney Webb. This is an older episode. Hopefully this is the right one. This is the right one. This was a little bit after all this whole crash happened. And they had one of my favorite financial dudes on there, John Titus. I also like Peter Schiff. And John Titus is I think he's brilliant. He's excellent. One of the best out there. He has a channel called, he doesn't upload much, but his Best Evidence. So if you go to YouTube, search John Titus, Titus, Best Evidence, must follow. Must follow, dude. Whitney Webb is a must follow. I subscribe to Rockfin. Actually, this is behind a paywall, so I hope I'm just going to play a clip, so I'm not playing a whole episode or anything. So I don't think she would mind. But he's talking about this. And I might have to do a separate video to dig deeper into this, because the Federal Reserve, they actually create reserves in the back end whenever there's a transaction. And that's why they're called the reserve. And here's the games that they were playing. This is what Krystal was talking about.
reserves were being used as an asset to bail out commercial banks. Okay. Now, a lot of people, including myself, erroneously thought that that was going to create inflation, but it doesn't, because we don't bank in reserves. You don't.
He's talking about '08 here. He's comparing '08 to 2020 when they did the same thing, but in '08 it didn't cause inflation because they didn't add currency currency money into circulation. So they were playing games behind the scenes, but they didn't add any money into circulation, so there's no inflation. But in 2020, it was a whole different ball game.
I don't have an account at the Fed. I don't have an account at the Fed. Giving me reserves isn't going to do me any good. It's like Chuck E. Cheese tokens. To me, I can't use them. I don't bank at the Fed. I bank at a regular bank. I transact business in bank money, not reserves. Okay. So that money in 2008, 2009, those reserves, the reserves don't leak out into the retail system. They're separate. They're opposite polarity dollars. They're, like I say, they're IOMs and not IOUs. And so there was no inflation back then. And in a lot of ways, that changed in a major way during the pandemic, where suddenly you had the Fed issuing reserves. They created $3.5 trillion in reserves in the space of a few weeks. But this time,
so that's not money in circulation. They created this trillion in reserves. They're playing these games with loaning the money out because they had to save Wall Street.
You saw the parallel increase in bank money. So back in 2008 and 2009, when the Fed added, I'm just going to throw out a number. Let's say they added $2 trillion of reserves to the system in '08 and '09. That had no effect on the retail money supply. The retail money supply just kept doing its thing, kind of going up in a straight line, despite the fact that the Fed issued trillions of dollars in reserves in '08 and '09, didn't have any effect on the retail money supply. But that changed big time in 2020. And when the Fed created reserves this time in 2020 to bail out the banks or to do whatever they were doing, you saw the retail money supply also tick up $3.5 trillion. It was a dollar for dollar lockstep response of the retail money supply, the bank money, to the wholesale money supply.
So that's a wrap. That's separate from the government spending. That money right there has nothing to do with the government spending. That's separate.
The reserves. And that was a radical departure. And that's what no one's talking about. No one but me. I talk about this because I know how they're doing it. I've had videos that discuss, how does the Fed pull that trick off? And the answer is they basically.
Listen to how dirty this is. You got to listen to this. Maybe I'll do a different video to break it down. I'll just play it and see. Hopefully you can follow. Dirty game.
It's a three-party transaction. This time, instead of transferring the reserves to Citigroup's not the only party involved. Let's say that there would be another party involved. Let's say a hedge fund or a retirement account. Let's use CalPERS. This time, the Fed would transfer. They'd still transfer $1 billion to Citigroup, but the difference is Citigroup wouldn't transfer the corresponding asset back to the Fed. CalPERS would. And so why is this important? This is important because CalPERS, those assets are things like treasuries and, say, mortgage-backed securities. They're dogs. They're not returning. They don't have any sort of rate of return on them. CalPERS wants to dump them because they've got retirees, drawing money out of.
So basically the Fed was giving these third parties money for gunk to add just as a way to get money into circulation. So they bailed out the gunk and gave them real money so they could turn it around.
The system, CalPERS needs a higher return for its money than what it's getting on a treasury. So how's it work? CalPERS wants to dump its treasury, but CalPERS knows full well it's not going to get a good price in that treasury. So in 2020, what happens is CalPERS dumps the treasury, but they sell it to the Fed. And the way this works is the Fed doesn't give CalPERS the reserves because CalPERS is like us. Those reserves aren't going to do CalPERS a bit of good. So what the Fed says to CalPERS is, hey, give us the treasury and you bank at Citigroup, CalPERS, we'll transfer the $1 billion in reserves to Citigroup. And now they've got an imbalance on their balance sheet. They're up $1 billion in reserves on the.
So they say, you bank with this bank here, we'll transfer the money behind the scenes to the bank. And to balance out the balance sheet, the bank will give you the money. It's just money laundering is literally all it is, where they can create the money.
Asset side, they need a corresponding $1 billion liability. And that's where you come in, CalPERS. Citigroup, when they get that $1 billion in reserves, they're going to have to create a $1 billion account in your name in bank money as they.
So they literally create just a digital, they just literally type out the digits. This isn't like they're not printing, this is not literal printing of money. They're transferring digits in a bank account just on screen.
Liability to counterbalance that. And now you, CalPERS, can take that $1 billion in bank money that you just got from Citigroup, and you can go buy Tesla. You can go buy Amazon, whatever.
So why do you think all those things bounced right back up? But now you have this extra, whatever, it sounds like about 3.5 trillion in currency at that moment added in circulation. They knew, everybody knew it's going to crash at some point. So buy it. It's just a pump and dump. It's literally, and they're making money on the way down. They knew it was going to crash, so they just short on the way down. On the way up, they do their calls or whatever they're doing. So they're making hella money on the way up, hella money on the way down, and it's theft. It's a tax against everyone else. It's an invisible tax. It's not a tax you can even look at on paper.
Whatever you want, you've dumped the treasury. We now have the treasury. And you can get into the stock market. You can invest in the high-flying SPACs, whatever you want to do. And that's what went on in 2020. And that was the radical departure.
So that's what happened. That's what Krystal Ball was getting on, what she was talking about. But I think for me, it's just I have a different approach. That would have been a great opportunity for her to say, so look at all this stuff. The Fed is the problem. And after the financial crisis of 2008, this is still stemming back to that, all of this. None of the big banks were subpoenaed. None of them faced any consequences for their criminal activity. So if Krystal Ball was a true populist, she would be up there saying, why is there so much energy in trying to get Trump indicted and having him not run again? You do realize the people who are criminals that stole money from us never faced any consequences. And that's why you're right now, in part, why you're going to the gas pump and getting bent over because of all of this. And you have energy about Trump. This is where the energy needs to be. Why don't more people talk about it? Jordan, thanks for stopping by. One of the things that really got me into Comic Dave Smith is he will talk to you about it. And you will realize in a society, people who are immune from justice and consequences, they are the real ones who run our society. So you tie back into Texas. It's even bigger than Texas and the Supreme Court and all that. When you don't have justice for people who break the law and steal from people, then that's the beginning of the end. It's just a matter of time at that point. So 2008 was another big turning point when those banks, not only did those banks not get subpoenaed, not have any consequences, they got bailed out at the time. They were too big to fail. We got to let them fail. They were too big. They were too big to bail out. That's the answer. Now, it would have been painful, but we just keep procrastinating and procrastinating. And you just, at some point, you're going to have to meet the maker. Like, your decisions are going to catch up with you. We have nowhere to run right now. There is nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide. You can't print money to get you out of this. That's not going to help, obviously. Raising interest rates is going to cause problems. And if inflation is at 8.6 for the month, and that's a low end. That's using their estimate. If inflation's at 8.6, if you don't have interest rates above 8.6, you're not doing anything. It has to be above, at least above where inflation is. There's no way out of this. I think eventually Bitcoin, I'm going to put Bitcoin in my white pill moment. Bitcoin, I know the worth of Bitcoin has dropped, but I think it's exposed people who never really saw what the point of Bitcoin was. To me, Bitcoin wasn't something to just buy like a stock. It is the future of currency. It's what, in my opinion, if you were to get rid of the Federal Reserve right now, Bitcoin is what you would want to use. I think El Salvador went to Bitcoin and people are trying to knock them now because the value went down. No, they have a true currency now. That if you have a true currency that's not controlled by a central bank, then you can trust that market. It's decentralized. It's what we want for our government. We want to get the feds out of the way and just let society walk and operate. So Bitcoin is still, I'm talking about not these other altcoins. I'm talking about BTC. There might be some other ones. I'm not a Bitcoin expert in like these other private coins and all these other ones. BTC though, I don't know what you would back it with or if you would need to back it with anything like gold or whatever, like the dollar used to be. But I think that is where we go. They want to go to these central bank digital currencies, CBDC, but that's just the same game they're going to be playing that they're playing with the dollar. You definitely don't want to see CBDC because that's where you get to. If we had the CBDC right now, they would probably say, hey, you've got to spend your money or it will expire in a month to control inflation. That they would literally take money out of currency. They could literally just take it from you. Say, hey, your money's all digital, so it's going to expire in 2 months. 10% of your money. Now, Constitution, all that's in the way, but I don't know what's going on with the Constitution now.